Hello, and welcome to another episode of, what did I call this again? Solipsist Rambles, I think, was the new name that I definitely haven't made images for yet. Anyway, welcome back. Today, in follow-up to both a couple of my previous videos in this series, as well as some comments that I received, and also an episode of Later Alligator that I played recently and I think should air before this. I want to talk today about what I don't know exactly what the title of this episode is going to be. It's probably going to be something along the lines of like fandoms, parasociality, and toxic relationships. And I've spent like the last hour taking notes on this of my thoughts and some other notes, and realizing this is way out of scope. So I'm going to try real hard to keep this under like 20 minutes because that's kind of the target I try and hit for these videos. Otherwise I start needing to, write a proper script and maybe make a DTF video. So let's talk about online behavior again, because, well, that's the space that we're in right here. If you're watching this video, and mostly I'm just yodeling into the void, if you're watching this video, you are probably online a significant amount of the time. And this is a behavior, or this is a set of behaviors and sort of social structures that has become a lot more prevalent with the advent of the internet, in particular in the last couple of years, but is nothing new. And I feel like that's worth noting right off the bat. The type of behavior that people see online and bemoan all the time, the toxicity of the internet, the way that fandoms get into fights, or, just people's behavior in general, there are unique aspects of it, to be sure, about being online and about a certain level of anonymity that comes with that. However, none of these like psychological underpinnings that drive these behaviors are new. And people, tale as old as time, humans like to argue, and they like to take things personally, and they like to not see other people's perspectives or understand the shortcomings in their own perspectives. So mostly this particular video, I'm going to talk about the sort of intense social behaviors that have been labeled as sort of parasociality, but this extends to other things that are very closely adjacent, including things like toxicity within fandoms and the way that people's obsession with media, and even if it's completely fictional, really, it comes from an understandable place, but it spins out of control relatively quickly. I find this really interesting to see people's behaviors, but it also makes for an often very unpleasant experience if you have to try and, be adjacent to that behavior, or even if you find yourself experiencing it yourself. And I think that's something I want to point out, is this is not unique. It's not something that only happens to like a certain tiny subset of people. This is shades of gray. And I think often when talking about this subject, people talk about the really extreme cases, where words like phrases like terminally online and incel and simping get thrown around a lot. And I think that's a really bad idea, only because it pigeonholes this kind of psychology into a certain type of person, but also misses like how common this is, even among people who have much less severe versions of it. And if you're pretty online, I'm going to guess that most people have had some element of this before. I'll get into the details on that shortly. But I think it's worth pointing out this is not new to the internet. As long as people have known about each other and had mass communication or even limited communication between areas and things. This has been a thing. Even going back just to the last century, the obsession with celebrity and that sort of thing, all the way, 100 plus years ago. And before that, the kind of gossip you'd hear about the nobility in whatever country, the monarchy or the local nobles or whoever, there was always, that's very natural to get a sort of unusual level of fixation at a distance for people who you probably have no connection to at all. But this also comes in a lot of different flavors in our modern times. It's easy, like I said, to pigeonhole it into this, very sort of, again, here's another one, basement dweller that gets thrown around a lot. Behavior of people who are like very psychologically unwell, basically, and develop a level of obsession that is genuinely in strict need of like professional psychological help. But I think it's very normal to get attached to media and to the people who might be involved in that media. I think probably most people have had an experience of watching a television show or a movie or something like that, even if it's just a movie that you really enjoyed and got really attached to characters and maybe cried over something that happened to a character or something like that. That is a very parallel type of, psychological understanding of another human being who you really have no attachment to. But especially in the era now that we have the social media that we have, it is easier and easier to get closer and closer to what appears to be a real relationship, when in reality, the distance between you is probably just as great as historically has been in many of these other contexts that I've talked about. For me personally, from my personal experience, some years ago now, man, it's been some time, there was a group that I watched pretty regularly on YouTube that made videos like every single day. They had events and podcasts and things like that. And, I pretty much watched everything they made, and followed them very closely. And then one day, like after I'd watched them for years and years, they had an announcement and said, "We're not making content anymore. We're going our separate ways. Bye." And yeah, it impacted me a lot. It had been part of my daily life for a lot of time at that point. And there was a level of social attachment to, not only is this part of my life, but I feel like I know these people to some extent. It doesn't go to that level, that severe level that is usually talked about of, oh, I'm, obsessed with this person. But it was like, oh, bummer, I'm not going to hear from these people anymore. I'm not going to see this content. No more of it will be made. Some of it's literally going to disappear, and it's going to be forgotten and that sort of thing. But, after a little while, it sort of faded from my memory, and I have fond memories about those people and those times and the content, but the emotional impact is temporary. What's interesting now, and what I think has gotten particularly severe more recently, is that the lines have become blurrier and blurrier, and the behaviors of both creators and fans has gotten them closer and closer together and amplified the level of emotional attachment that is present between individuals, viewers, whatever, and creators. And especially in the era of, live streaming it's not the hot new thing by any means, but it's been having an accelerating presence in our social media landscape. It's that narrows the gap significantly, or it has the potential to narrow the gap significantly between the creator and the viewer. And whether that's, as I mentioned in my previous video, talking about the chat experience, watching live streams, the fact that it is live immediately narrows the gap between viewer and creator. And if you're in the chat and you're chatting and you might get replies from, depending on how attentive and how busy the creator is, you might get replies from them. And that immediately starts to deepen a sort of emotional attachment. That goes in a lot of different directions, which is one of the things I'm not going to branch out into in this video because we're already at 10 minutes. But that is a normal thing, and that is not a bad thing. However, when left unchecked, it's the kind of thing that can end up in sort of a slippery slope into the kind of antisocial, parasocial behaviors that are really damaging for everyone. This is not just a matter of this is really harmful to everyone. It's potentially harmful to the creator because they're just trying to do a job, be an entertainer, whatever, and have an exchange. It's harmful to the community because if members of that community become toxic or obsessed or have negative behaviors, that ripples out to the community, make people feel uncomfortable or not want to be present anymore, or feel like some individuals are ruining the experience. And it's bad for the individual as well, of course, because that's a level of psychological attachment that is ultimately it can become very unhealthy. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm going to try and limit it. I should also note, this goes the other way as well, because I have certainly noticed more than a few occasions in my perusings of the internet that sometimes the creators also suffer the same kind of psychological attachment to their chats. And that is actually something I've seen more and more, especially in the last few years, where newer creators in particular may not have the same level of distance that they create between them and their chats. And I think it's natural to want to be, for want of a better word, intimate with your chat and have a level of friendship. You don't want to alienate your community. You don't want to necessarily keep them at a super long arm's length, because it can make your content less compelling. Personally, for me, as a creator for many years now, I try to be very careful about what I share about my personal life and who I am and who I associate with and the things that I do. I talk a lot about a lot of different topics and media and psychology and these other things. But I try and keep at arm's length. And some of that has to do, I think, personally, with just my experience of the internet and where I started on the internet. I was on the internet in the fairly early days when, communications was pretty limited, and, it was kind of the Wild West in some respects, but also there weren't that many places to go. The internet wasn't that big a place, and it's a very different thing now. And so, as I mentioned again in a different video, this sort of idea of having an online persona and limiting what you're sharing has gone away in significant ways, and is very noticeable in younger generations who may just use their full legal name and say whatever about their personal life. Back in the day, we had a joke about ASL, and if you get that, then you get it, and if you don't, I'm not going to explain it. But that was in some ways it was very real. In some ways it was a joke, because it was that's dangerous information to potentially give someone. And these days it's just the first thing that a lot of people blast on the internet. And it's a very different mentality these days. So this gets into a lot of other questions about social trends and age trends, and also sort of even historical events. 5 years ago, we had a big thing that happened that sort of messed up everyone's socialization for a while. And some people took it really badly, and some people took it not so badly. And for some people, that was because they were so reliant on their in-person interactions and had nothing else and had to build things from scratch. And for other people, it was just they needed a certain level of interaction that they weren't able to get with the same readiness, even if they had those digital relationships built up and those connections that they could, those resources to make those online connections. But I think I'm going to be fascinated in the realms of psychology and sociology studies for the next 40 years, what people look at the impact, the long-term like psychological impacts of a couple of, a year or a couple of years of isolation, and what that did to a lot of people's psychology. And I think that drove a lot of people to be more online than they've ever been before. It also, I think, led to a big boom in streaming. And these both from the viewership side and the creator side. There are a shocking number of creators who started just about exactly 5 years ago in one form or another. And I think that's understandable and normal, but it can be a slippery slope if you're not kind of checking yourself out and not getting you're not getting a reality check in what your own psychology is and how your perception of reality lines up to the reality. As one sort of final note before I come to my sort of conclusion, I think this also is reflective more long-term of a loss in general society, especially in the United States, but this is a worldwide thing, of what's often referred to as third places or third spaces, which is basically a place where you're not at work or home, or if you're younger, let's say school or home. Those have disappeared within my lifetime. A lot of them had already disappeared when I was, very young, but they've all but disappeared now completely. And that's a whole other discussion that I will probably, if I make the longer form follow-up, I will delve into further. But as my sort of conclusion for this thought, I want to talk about the psychology and the sort of checking yourself when you're being online in spaces, in live streams, in forums, in YouTube videos, in media chats, and whatever. Because I think this is a normal, if I haven't made it very clear already, I think this is a normal behavior that lots of people succumb to in one form or another. And being able to recognize when you are getting, you're having a psychological reaction, an emotional reaction to something that doesn't necessarily warrant that is important. It's important for your, your self-regulation, your emotional regulation. So I think a lot of this comes down to understanding your relationship to the media that you're consuming, or the individual, if we're talking about personality-driven media, creators, or what's the term? Influencers. I hate that term so much. Is understanding what that media landscape looks like and what your relationship is to it. So understanding your very literal presence in the community, whether that which often means being one of thousands or one of millions, who is generally unremarkable. And I think everybody needs to get comfortable understanding. People don't like to think of themselves not as a unique and special individual. But I think one of the most liberating psychological things you can do is have that ego death of understanding that you don't matter. It's really important. And it's something that a lot of people ruin their lives over. because if you think that you somehow deserve attention and deserve more attention than is your quote unquote fair share, that's where you immediately start to have problems. So understanding that you are just one in a very large crowd is incredibly important. And that comes even down to if you're in a community that's fairly small, or even if you're in a community where you are a comparatively prominent member, that doesn't necessarily make you deserve any greater attention or attachment or anything else. You are not owed anything. To go back to my previous video, walking in and behaving like you deserve a welcome and an entrance, that's not normal behavior. That's kind of weirdo behavior in most contexts. So understanding your presence within the community. And then there's just understanding your relationship to the media or to the individual that you're interacting with. Even if you're interacting directly with the streamer, I think to lean into the severe side of this thing, talking about the type of people who get obsessive behaviors and obsessive sort of delusions of their relationship to the streamer, that like whether that's a friendship level or a romantic level or whatever, that you need to be able to take that step back and say, whoa, hold on. Who is this person actually? Like they're, some random person whose name, just in this scenario, we'll go with this. I don't know their real name. I don't know where they live. I don't know like anything about, or I know very little about their normal life. This gets blurry when creators talk about their personal lives, but that's part of this whole thing. But I don't know them personally. I've never met them. If I walked up to them, they won't know who I am. And even if that did happen by some happenstance, and even if I told them like my name or whatever, like that doesn't entitle you to any further experience. And that level of obsession is something that always needs to be sort of like keyed in on and then rolled back. I know I'm probably speaking this to exactly the type of people who don't need it, and the kind of people who are most susceptible to this psychological behavior and this fixation are probably never going to see this video if anyone sees it at all. But I think it's worth getting into. And then on top of all that, just, understanding your participation in the reality or unreality of that media. And this gets into things like advertising, sponsorships, who's playing a character, that sort of thing. Because even from my perspective, I don't play a character on this channel, but I've even been told like, oh, you've got a recording voice. I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. I've had friends tell me that before. This is your voice has like slightly different. You do slightly different things when you're recording than you do in normal life. I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize I did that. But that goes to many, many different layers and levels of behavior. Whether it's down to somebody who is full on playing a character, doing a voice, and it may not be explicit that they're doing such. Whether they have a name, whether they have a literal character on screen that they're playing, or whether they are being fully honest about their opinions, about the things that they're engaging with. If they're telling you real stories or just making things up because they make for good storytelling on a stream or something. Or down to the advertising and the like lower tiers of social media level of it's impossible to, or well, I shouldn't say it's impossible. It's difficult to tell when people are being earnest and honest versus just trying to market to you. And that can be down to, a sob story that somebody's telling on their stream that might not be true at all, or just certain patterns of behavior that they might not even notice they're doing in order to engage with their community to try and get more more of the kind of behaviors that get them donations or something like that. And that may be deliberate, it may be malicious, or it may be completely unintentional, because the back and forth in a relationship, you get into certain patterns of behavior that you don't even recognize you're doing. And so the streamer and the community can get into a pattern of reciprocal behavior that may not be healthy for either of them, but neither of them really know that they're doing it. And I've observed some of these from the outside, and it's really interesting, but it's also kind of worrying, because people don't recognize the way they manipulate others, the way they manipulate themselves, and the interactions that they have that are like recursively manipulative between groups and individuals. So all of that to say that, be careful. Don't just be careful about, sharing your personal information online. Consider your psychology. Consider your emotional investment in the things that you do, the things that you watch, the people you engage with, the communities that you engage with, and work on developing those reflective impulses. If you're getting emotionally invested in something, or you find yourself getting heated over something, or maybe disproportionately attached to something that's happening, that's something you're watching, take that pause. Do your very best to keep this in your mind. If taking that pause and stepping back out of yourself and assessing the scenario and going, I'm sitting on my couch in front of the TV or on my phone or in front of a computer, and I'm getting heated over someone I've never heard said about somebody else, someone I've never met said about somebody else I've never met, or something like that. That is often the level of disengagement that people are completely missing. And that gets into drama of all levels and all kinds, and people, going on day, month, week-long fights with thousands of people on the internet, and all-out brawls and crazy behavior. So if you find yourself ever getting into those things, try and check yourself. And if you're finding it hard to try and check yourself, step back further and figure out why you're finding it hard, because that's the level of introspection that I think everybody should be aspiring to. It's difficult out here, and I want this whole video to have a level of nuance of saying these behaviors aren't evil, and we don't need to cancel streaming or whatever. These things don't need to be problematic. It's about our individual responsibility to not reflect and deepen the kind of behaviors and perform the same kind of behaviors that make our favorite spaces sometimes kind of negative. Anyway, this again went on too long, big surprise, and if I had gone through my full list of notes, it probably would have been 2+ hours long. Good Lord. Maybe I do need to make that video. Anyway, if you really like this and you think I should make the full thing, drop me a line or something in the comments. And thank you for making it to the end. I've been the Social Solipsist. I'll see you guys next time.